Hey guys, Sue's here. Welcome back to another Keto Dinner Ideas video. If you are new here, we film these every single week to give you a little motivation, inspiration to get in the kitchen and get your keto meal prep on. This week, by special request, we're actually doing Keto Breakfast for dinner ideas. So we have 4 new easy keto breakfast for dinner recipes, and we hope you like them. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Join our crew. We make these every week, and let's get into the video. First up this week, we made this awesome keto steak and egg breakfast bowl. This was so delicious, although you can tell here my avocado was not ripe. So to start with, I made a marinade for our steak by taking 1/4 cup of olive oil, a tablespoon of Dijon mustard, and 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce. And I just added those to a little dish and whisked those together until they were fully mixed and smooth. And then for our steak, we are using 1 pound of flank steak, and we'll actually just be using half of it for this recipe, and I'm going to use half of it after it's cooked for a recipe later in the week. So I just have it in a little plastic container, and I'm adding some of our marinade to it and just making sure it's all fully coated, all on the inside and outside of our steak. And I am doing this in the morning and letting this sit all day so that it can be nice and flavorful when it's time to get dinner going. Now, after I have it all fully covered with the marinade, I am going through and poking holes all on the inside and outside all over the flank steak, popping the lid and putting it in the fridge. Meanwhile, here are my avocados, and usually, I have a problem with them getting ripe too fast, but our grocery delivery, they are like the rawest avocados I've seen. So I am popping them into a paper bag with a couple bananas, and this usually takes like at least a day to ripen avocados this way, but I have high hopes, and so I'm putting them in there and seeing what 6 to 8 hours can do. Now, when you're ready to cook for the evening, I'm taking a large saute pan. I have it on medium-high heat, and I waited until my pan got really nice and hot before I added my flank steak to it, and I am cooking it for 5 minutes on each side without disturbing it, and using tongs to flip it over to do the other side the same way. And this is going to leave it still nice and medium rare in the middle of the steak. So I'm just going to remove it to a separate plate and let it rest. Then in a dish, I have 4 large eggs. I'm adding a tablespoon of heavy cream, a little bit of sea salt, a little bit of ground black pepper, and then I'm just going to whisk these together really well. And I'm going to let those sit for just a second because I don't want my eggs to be cold. And I'm going to go over and check on my avocado. So you can see my bananas went from all the way yellow to some spots on them, so it definitely ripened those up, which is not what I wanted to do. Unfortunately, my avocado is still so unripe, but we're gonna go with it. Hopefully you guys at home have nice and ripe avocados. I couldn't even get the skin off, you can see here, but I sliced them up anyway. And then I am taking my steak after it's rested and putting it on a cutting board, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut half of it off, like I said, to use in a recipe later on in the week. And then I'm going to shave the rest of it. And I do have my oven preheated to 400 because I am gonna slice my steak up and then put it into a glass dish and just stick it in the oven for about 5 minutes to go ahead and come up to the temperature that I would totally like it to be while I fix the eggs. And I just wiped all of the grease and everything out of my saute pan, added a tablespoon of butter over medium-low heat, let that melt, and then I'm adding my eggs here. And eggs are the easiest thing in the world to make, and I'm sure all of you know how to make scrambled eggs, but you can see here that I cooked mine. This is not how I generally like to cook mine. I generally like them to be nice and ooey gooey, and I kind of sit there and cook and scrape them, and I got distracted. And if you get distracted while you're cooking eggs, they're just gonna, these were still great, but just not as I prefer them. So once I got undistracted, you can see I just kept scrambling to try to salvage the situation. And they were great, but I do like mine more ooey gooey soft than chunky and fluffy. So it's all a matter of preference though. So after I get those scrambled up, I'm just going to take the steak out of the oven and go ahead and plate everything. And here's what it looks like plated up. Now this was delicious. This is my husband's plate, and I put the avocado on there and he ate it. But like I said, it was so far away from being ripe. I would have done better to just take some frozen avocado out of the freezer and put it on here. So make sure you start with the ripe avocado. Next up, this one was definitely a winner. It's a sheet pan breakfast hash. It's roasted Brussels sprouts and mushrooms and bacon. So to start with, I took a pound of fresh Brussels sprouts and a pound of white mushrooms. These are actually less carbs than the cremini mushrooms, so I went ahead and used those. Not a pound of these, 8 ounces of these. I hate mushrooms. I'm cooking them because my husband likes them, and I never cook them for him because I don't like them. And just a pack of, I'm using just Kirkland's bacon. To get my Brussels sprouts ready, I soaked them in water to get them nice and clean. I'm trimming the end off, and then I'm just cutting each of them in half and removing any of the outer leaves that look bad, spreading them out on a baking sheet that I lined with nonstick foil. Then I went ahead and washed the mushrooms, and like I said, I don't like the mushrooms, so I'm leaving them in bigger pieces so that I can easily pick them out. I don't mind the flavor of the mushrooms cooking up with my food. It's just a texture issue for me, so I want to make sure that I am able to pick those out. But if you all like mushrooms, then you might want to dice yours up a little finer. And I'm just spreading those out on the baking sheet as well. Now I'm taking a couple tablespoons of olive oil and just sprinkling that over our Brussels sprouts and mushrooms. And I'm gonna add a little bit of sea salt and a little bit of ground black pepper to those vegetables. Then I'm topping them with about 1/4 of a cup of chopped onion and just sprinkling that around. And then I have 8 slices of bacon that I just folded multiple times and chopped up in really kind of rough cuts. And I'm gonna spread that out evenly over the pan. I did try to stick it like on top of all of the Brussels sprouts to just make sure that bacon grease really gets in there and gives it that nice flavor. And then I'm popping this into a 425-degree oven for 15 minutes. Pulling it out of the oven, we're going to go ahead and add some minced garlic. So I have about 2 teaspoons of minced garlic here. And I'm just kind of evenly distributing it in my pan. And then I'm just going to take a spatula and kind of scramble this all together to make sure that minced garlic is all throughout there. And then I'm popping this back in the oven for 10 minutes to get my bacon nice and crisp. And then after I moved it from the oven, everything looks so good. It smells so good. I'm just going to make about 6 little wells, little spaces to put some egg. We're going to crack eggs on this sheet pan, and I just want to make sure that they're directly against the heat of the pan so they can almost fry up in that bacon grease. So we're just going to crack those all in there. And make sure you pull out any shell bits. I had one right there. And then I'm sprinkling each egg with a tiny bit of red pepper flakes and a little bit of everything but the bagel seasoning by Trader Joe's. And then I'm popping this back into the oven. For me, I did like 7 to 8 minutes to get my eggs exactly how I wanted them. But again, that's a matter of preference. And there it is out of the oven, and here it is plated up. This was excellent. Again, this is my husband's. It's plated up because I did not eat any of the mushrooms. I don't even generally like Brussels sprouts, and everything was really good this way. Next up, we have this beautiful looking, interesting looking keto breakfast for dinner recipe that I wish I could really recommend to you guys. It started out as a paleo jicama recipe. Of course, I'll link the original down below as always. And I had to already adjust the heck out of it to make it keto. And then I tried to follow her cooking instructions, but that just wasn't gonna work to get the jicama even cooked slightly. So I wish I could recommend this recipe. I can't, but I'm gonna show you anyway because we keep it real around here and show you the good and the bad. So to start with, I'm taking, this is like a medium-sized jicama. The original recipe called for 5 cups of cubed jicama. I'm not doing that. I'm only gonna use 3 cups of it, but I am just gonna go ahead and cut it. So to start with, you wanna cut the ends off of your jicama to give you a flat surface to kind of work with. People do this differently. You can see the skin peels right off in chunks, but I do prefer to use a peeler. Some people like to take their knife and cut little slits in the skin and then use their hands to peel it. And here is all of the jicama we have diced up. Now it does freeze well. This made about 6 cups total. We're gonna use 3 cups for the recipe, and then I'm gonna take the other half of the jicama and just put it straight into a freezer bag and stick it in the freezer for a future recipe. And over on the stovetop, and I think this is about a 10-inch cast iron skillet, I'm adding 1 pound of just regular ground like breakfast sausage, and make sure you always look at your carbs really well on any type of processed meat like this. And I am using my meat chopper upper tool, best $5 kitchen tool I ever bought. It's always linked in the description box. I love it. To get that nice and brown, and then I'm taking a slotted spoon and removing the sausage to a separate container and leaving the grease in the pan, adding my jicama. I do still have this on medium heat. and I am just stirring my jicama all around, trying to make sure all of it's coated nicely in the grease to help soften it. And I'm cooking this probably about 10 minutes already to just try to really work on it. And then I'm adding 1/3 cup beef broth, and I'm going to bring this up to a bubbling simmer and continue to cook this until all of that has evaporated and cooked out of the pan. Of course, adding a little sea salt, adding some ground black pepper, and just stirring and cooking until all of that broth is gone. And then the original recipe called for a lot more veggies than what I'm adding, but again, we're trying to make sure that this is keto friendly and lower carb, and jicama does, have carbs in it. So we're only adding 1/4 cup of chopped bell pepper. I just used some frozen one out the freezer, and I'm adding 1/4 cup of chopped onion, and I'm just going to continue to cook this over medium heat until my onion and my peppers are nice and soft. And again, trying to get this jicama softened up. And once it is, I'm adding my sausage back to the skillet. I do already have my oven preheated to 350, and I'm going to mix this in really well. And at this point, the original recipe tells you to just go ahead and make wells in this and add your eggs and pop it in the oven for 15 to 18 minutes, and then it would just be done. I already knew that just wasn't going to work. So I'd already decided to pre-bake the jicama before I even add the eggs. And this is where the recipe kind of just goes downhill. I've always used jicama to make like fries, and I've never had an issue. I think because I usually cook those at higher heat. So if I ever make this again, I will initially start off cooking it at like 425 for a longer amount of time. But to keep it real with you guys, here's what happened with this recipe. I evened this out, and I went ahead and put it into the 350-degree oven without adding the eggs because it wasn't going to work, for 20 minutes. And then I pulled it out and tested a piece of the jicama, and it totally just felt raw still, even after all of that cooking and 20 minutes in the oven. So I stuck the whole thing back in the oven for another 20 minutes and then took it out of the oven. So it's cooked 40 minutes in the oven at this point, plus, at least 15 or 20 minutes on the stovetop. I had high hopes. Checked it again. It's still so firm. At this point, I'm frustrated and dinner's running late because this is an egg dish. We're not meal prepping this ahead of time. So very frustrated. So went ahead and stirred this all up so my sausage on top wouldn't get overcooked. Made sure it was all good to go. Popped it back into the oven for another 20 minutes. So this is an hour in the oven total. Brought it back out, checked my jicama. It's still not as tender as I would like it and as it gets, like when I make fries out of it. And I don't know if this jicama was just really old and extra fibrous or what. I think it's just the oven temperature was too low. But I said, whatever, more choice words than that. And I made some wells in it and went ahead and cracked some eggs in it and proceeded. And then I popped it back into the oven for about, I might have done like 10 to 15 minutes, just until my eggs were set. Took it out. Here it is plated up. It's beautiful. It's tasty. Surprisingly, the jicama still having a little firmness to it didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. But I definitely was looking for more of that like cottage fry kind of texture, and like the texture that I would normally get from jicama when I make jicama fries. And that is not what happened here. Again, it was an utter failure. The original recipe is linked down below. You already have to adjust it a whole lot to even make it like a keto-friendly recipe. So if you make it, keep all of that in mind. And I would suggest pre-cooking the jicama, pre-roasting it in the oven at like 425 for at least half an hour before you even get started on the rest of it. There you go, just keeping it real with you guys. Next up, the last recipe of the week was awesome. My husband actually made this one using the other half of that steak we made in the beginning of the week. So these are cheesesteak omelets, and oh my goodness, they actually taste like Philly cheesesteak. So good. So in a dish, he took 4 eggs and he added a tablespoon of olive oil to those and went ahead and whisked them together. And then he took a non-stick skillet and he poured half of the mixture in there, and he does have it at medium heat. And he's just gonna tilt the pan a little bit to make sure it's nice and even, and then pop a lid on it to let that fully cook. I think he only did this for like a minute or two until it was set. Took the lid off, and then he's just using a spatula to loosen the edges, and then the whole thing, because that olive oil is mixed in there, will just slide right off into a plate. He's pouring the other half of the egg mixture in there, repeating that process. And then he's got 2 egg wraps to use for our omelets. It's not traditionally how we cook omelets, so I would say these are more like egg wraps, like a roll. But anyway, putting the pan back onto the heat, he added another tablespoon of olive oil, and then to that he added about half of a small to medium green bell pepper and probably about a quarter of an onion sliced. And he's just sauteing these until they soften up, and he is slicing up the other half of that steak. So he's just pouring the steak juices out of the bag we stored it in on top of those veggies, which made them nice and yummy. Popping the lid on top of it to help that cooking process. And he's just cooking those down until everything's nice and softened and the onions are caramelized some, probably about 10 minutes total cooking those veggies down. Then he's making a space in the middle of the pan and just adding that steak. And remember, we stored the steak at medium rare, so he's adding it to that hot pan to go ahead and cook it up a little bit more. Topping it with 4 slices of regular provolone cheese. I prefer the regular to the smoked provolone, and I have a hard time kind of finding regular provolone cheese anymore. Tell me if you guys have that experience as well. Then he's just stirring that cheese in, letting it melt. And then he's adding 4 more slices of provolone to it. And this is very thinly sliced provolone. Putting the lid on to melt that as well and stirring it up. And in the original recipe that we based this on, that's linked down below, they then filled their eggs up. They added their cheese after the fact, and then they rolled this and put it back in the pan. But for us, it worked just to use it as an egg wrap. And he took half of the steak and veggie mixture, put it in one of the egg wraps, just rolled it really simple, and the mixture was nice and hot enough that it just heated the egg all the way through, and we didn't need to put it back in the pan and fool around with any of that. So this worked really well for us. Then he just cut it in half and served it up, and here it is. This was absolutely delicious. My favorite meal of the week, and maybe even more so because I didn't have to cook it myself, other than the steak that I prepped at the beginning of the week. But I highly recommend trying this one out. So good, so flavorful. There you go, guys. That's the good, the bad, the ugly. That's our keto dinner ideas video for the week. Special keto breakfast edition. If you like it, please give it a thumbs up. Comment down below your thoughts on any of these recipes, your experiences cooking jicama, any requests you have for any type of future video from us. We are going to try to be adding some different types of videos along with these in the future, and we'd love your feedback and suggestions. And until next week, bye guys.